Well, this is I Burn My CD here with Rocksteady for the next installment of the TurtleCoin podcast. And we've got a number of topics that we kind of want to address with you guys in this episode. First and foremost, it's going to be a discussion regarding fungibility and what that means when we talk about that in the scope of blockchains and the transactions that obviously drive those processes. And we'll touch a little bit on some of the current development updates regarding restoring wallets and making things a lot easier for users. How's that sound, Rock?
Sounds good to me.
So, if you've been following the news lately, there's been a lot of talk out there in a handful of different articles regarding eco-friendly mining, right? And the energy consumption required to propel these blockchains. Have you seen that stuff out there?
Yeah, I have. And I think there was an announcement recently of like the first fully compliant BTC block that just got mined.
What the hell do you mean by compliant?
That's what I'm trying to find out, man. I didn't know I was resisting.
Yeah, neither did I, and that's an important thing to think about, what these guys mean by compliant. And as you kind of take a look at some of the news articles out there, a lot of the focus seems to be on trying to use renewable energy, right, to power miners that are mining blocks, mining transactions, and all that hullabaloo, right? And that drive for that renewable resources is ultimately in support of the eco-friendly nature, because we know that mining today for POW does damage, in essence. It's using a lot of energy, right?
Yeah, and we're kind of guilty of that.
Indeed, but definitely not to the same scale as some of the larger projects, which is why, we've seen some news articles coming out, and a lot of it's been focused at Bitcoin and the energy consumption that's required to run that network. And some of the news articles have obviously called it out because, it is enough energy worldwide to power entire countries, right?
Yeah, I wonder if the focus on Bitcoin is just a side effect of its value and its position in the market, or if it truly is the most POW intensive, or I should say the biggest energy consumer in the entire proof of work ecosystem. Do you think there's other networks that may be hashing with more power?
I don't know if there's maybe more networks, as a whole, but if we take a look at the aggregate power usage of all of the POW networks out there, I bet you that it surpasses, the total energy consumption of the Bitcoin network today. I think that's probably a pretty safe bet. That's a lot of juice, right? And chasing after the fact that we want to use renewable energy for that type of stuff, and obviously Turtle's moving away from POW, so it doesn't necessarily directly affect us, but it's something that everybody wants to think about. The interesting topic came up in a news article that I read through, where they want to, or possibly want to, tag funds that are mined in an economically friendly way.
That doesn't even begin to compute.
Yeah, I kind of struggled with that myself, right? The thought that, first of all, we want to tag the funds. So what does that mean exactly? Well, in my mind, it means that, okay, the block is mined with somebody that is compliant, or, that there's proof that they mine with renewable energy sources, whether it's solar or geothermal or whatever it may be, right? And that they're being responsible with that power usage. But what does that tagging really do for anybody, right? That's probably the biggest question.
Immediately what it makes me think of is that now we've created a class of Bitcoins that are either better or lesser than the other ones that were mined traditionally. And how do you begin to negotiate the true value of a Bitcoin if you have some that were mined with blessing of the SEC, or some that were mined with the blessing of the hipsters in California? Where do you draw the line on the value of that? And I hate to bring price into the discussion so early, but how does that affect the price of a Bitcoin? It's kind of like whenever you get some Bitcoins in your possession, let's say that you use like a decentralized exchange or something like that, and you're just doing like a normal transaction. You're not even doing anything sketchy, so there's no reasonable assumption that you would get any kind of tainted Bitcoins, but lo and behold, you end up with some tainted Bitcoins. And then let's say you go and try to cash them out at Coinbase, and then before you know it, you have a full investigation that you're a party to, and you had no clue. So what does that mean? Like, how, to me, that's something that is pretty scary. In general, I don't do bad things, and I don't want to be wrapped up in somebody else's process of doing bad things. And why should I be held accountable for it if I'm just trying to use these cryptocurrencies as they're intended, which is, a discrete medium of transfer?
Exactly. And thinking about that a little bit more, to your your point and not necessarily driving at the value side of the discussion, but think about it from the standpoint of Bitcoin itself. It's hovering right around 89% fully emitted right now. Taking a quick look, 18.7 mil of 21 million coins.
It'll keep going until 2,140, if I recall correctly.
Well, exactly. But my point being, now there's this push for a ecologically friendly, or what the hell's the word I'm looking for? Eco-friendly. I'll just stick with eco-friendly aspect to the mining and kind of stamping those blocks and being responsible about the power consumption. But man, if you think about that, exactly like you said, all those newer blocks, let's say that they do put something through like this and they're tagged. That means that only 10% of the entire supply could potentially be tagged as being mined with clean energy, so to speak. What about the other 90%? Are those all garbage at that point? I mean, it brings a lot of questions to mind to what you mentioned before. What the hell was all that for? The other 90%. And the reason that I bring up this topic today is we don't have this problem, right?
Right. So that's a question I was going to ask next for the benefit of some of our listeners that may be wondering, is TurtleCoin susceptible to this? And fungibility is something that it's binary. There's no shades in between. There's no demi-fungible or quasi-fungible or anything like that. Either two things are indistinguishable from each other, or there are differences that set them apart. In the case of Bitcoin, no two Bitcoins are alike, no two Bitcoin inputs are alike, and the word fungibility means that somebody can take one and somehow say this one is distinct from the other because, and it could be any identifying characteristic. Enhancing these characteristics that differentiate two inputs was the basis behind Mastercoin, Color Coins, and Ethereum. So there are cool things that can be done with a non-fungible currency. However, even a blind guy will tell you that $2 are not the same. They have different serial numbers on them. You can trace them all over the United States. Look at whereisgeorge.com and you can see pretty clearly that since you can watch a single dollar make its way across the country, across the world, since you can differentiate it from a different dollar, by definition, cash is not fungible. You can't do the same thing with TurtleCoin. Without going too far into the tech side of it, things are shuffled around a little bit whenever you make a transaction. All of those labels that are on these inputs are random. They're not something that you're going to use as a differentiating factor to say, oh, I burned my CD, spent this handful of coins here, and it went to Z over here, and now Z has this many tainted coins. That's just not something that can happen.
Exactly. And the core difference there being, I think, again, I'll try not to go down the geeky road where I get super nerdy and talk about how all this is possible. But the key difference here is that, when outputs are created in TurtleCoin, and it'll be the same in V2, those are essentially brand new coins that are created out of every new transaction. Now, it's important to understand, though, it's not new emitted coins. In essence, the way that we address this and the way that it works is when you send funds, the funds that you send, that you actually spend, for lack of better words, are actually more or less burnt. And then new ones are created that go to the recipient. And of course, if you've got any change coming back to you, those are brand new coins coming back to you. Any data about those coins or those funds as part of that spend, for lack of better words, disappears. It doesn't exist anymore because they're gone and new ones come out the other side. That's what makes it possible for, two sets of funds to be fungible, right? Or to be able to exchange them without necessarily carrying the history of those. And it makes it impossible to taint those funds. And a lot of that's driven by the fact that, we do use ring signatures, right, to help obscure or help hide. Maybe that's not the right word, but the ring signatures make it very difficult to determine which funds are currently being spent. And as we go into V2, when we increase the size of those rings, it's going to become even more difficult to figure out which ones are being spent. So that whole process breaks down in being able to trace or follow, where the coins came from, where they're going to. But like I said, it really doesn't matter because inputs get burnt, outputs create new, for lack of better words, if that makes any sense.
That's an interesting way to think about it. I guess whenever I think about it, I always think of coins going from party A to to party B, but the idea of them being burned and then created anew and the same value being transferred across, that's kind of an interesting concept and an interesting way to think about it. It kind of changes the way that I mentally visualize it.
Well, the other way I've explained it at times is imagine that you have, let's talk about gold. Let's use gold as an example. The only reason that I'm using gold is because it makes it really easy to make this understandable, right? So let's imagine that we've got a jar or a drawer full of, I don't know, gold necklaces, gold rings. I mean, we've seen the ads on television before where you send in your gold and you get cash, but this is entirely different. You got this whole drawer full of gold, right? Maybe 3 necklaces, 2 rings. You don't have a whole lot of bling flinging around there. That's sad, for being
no, man.
for being Satoshi, I'd figure that you'd have a lot more bling.
I can not confirm or deny.
Fair enough. But anyways, let's say that we've got all that gold, right? And we wanted to spend it, same type of idea. When we create a transaction, in essence, we take that drawer full of gold and we melt it down and then cast, new things out of it. Whether that's a little piece that goes to you, or in a little piece that comes back to me as change. I'm in essence changing the structure. I'm melting it down and creating something new, but the amount in gold remains unchanged, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that somewhat makes sense. And I've used that same analogy before when trying to explain fungibility to people. And I think it basically comes down to where do your values lie? Because whether you look at fungible coins or you look at non-fungible coins, there's cool things that happen on either side of it. So whenever we talk about fungibility, people are quick to interpret the binary qualities of fungibility as one is good and one is bad, but it really just depends on your purpose. It's there's cool things that you can do with non-fungible tokens, and there's cool things you can do with fungible coins like TurtleCoin. But I think that you just kind of have to decide your position on it as a developer and kind of take that one way of that one philosophy, whether you're going to be fungible or not, because it's not easy to achieve both, and I don't think I know any that achieve both. What I'm trying to think about right now is, do I know of any coins that are private and also have like an NFT component or some type of tagging component? I can't think of any.
Nothing's coming to my mind either. I mean, there may be something that is out there that somebody's putting together that, using some metadata.
Everything I can think of is like an overlay protocol. So like Tari or Karai, everything is an overlay. It's not inherent to the currency itself.
True. And that's kind of what I was thinking as well. There's not a whole lot in that area, largely to your point, because that layer of fungibility, that privacy aspect of it makes it very difficult to do those types of things. So it does require an overlay in my mind.
Yeah. It's kind of like whether you want to drive a fast car or you want to drive a car that can carry things like a truck, and there's differences between them for different purposes. And it doesn't mean one is inherently better than the other. It's just one is better suited for some purposes and the other one's better suited for the other purpose.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I mean, that kind of goes back to some of the prior discussions that we've had that, there's never going to be one network, one project, one coin that's going to do everything well. There are going to be specific use cases for everything. And maybe some of our listeners are thinking, fungibility isn't important to me. That's not what draws me in. But we know that there's a large number of users that believe and understand that fungibility is important. I mean, just from the aspect of what I mentioned before, think about all that BTC that could be plausibly tagged as unclean.
Well, I think even the SEC is doing that too. Like there was recently, in addition to the eco-friendly, like whenever you brought up tagging blocks and things like that on the Bitcoin blockchain, I thought you were talking about the one that they just mined recently that was the first fully like SEC vetted block produced by it's some mining corporation. I can't remember their name, but it was like their first or second block they'd produced that was like fully, I'm not sure what aspect they had verified, but it was like a fully vetted mining operation paying all taxes on the block and everything's published. And I don't know, whenever I saw it, even though I'm not a Bitcoin miner anymore, and even though I'm not averse to paying taxes and things like that, I kind of had this knee jerk like, whoa, wait, hang on. Because to me, it seemed like people got really excited about something they could do, and they didn't think about whether it's something that they should do. Because it really makes it a us versus them very quickly. Companies that were doing things like Chainalysis, where they're looking at blockchains and analyzing them and looking at the provenance, so to speak, of various inputs and coins and accounts. That type of stuff used to be just like, hey, let's, check out what we can do for fun, haha. And real quick, it became like, hey, we're now contracting with the military and the intelligence agencies and other Five Eyes nations and things like that to conspire and collude to let's just see how we can spice this thing up, And before blockchain is really being given a chance to fly, people are already, I guess, kind of creating the legacy constructs from the legacy systems that they were trying to better in the first place. In a way, I think that people are seeking legitimacy of Bitcoin and other things with noble intentions, but they're seeking this legitimacy through the creation of these legacy archetypes that they sought to replace to begin with. People are like, hey, banks are inefficient, they don't do good jobs, and they're susceptible to human corruption. Let's create these perfect digital systems. And then now we're trying to involve humans in it again. We're trying to involve the same people that helped create, in some cases, problems that we have in the legacy currency that we're trying to improve upon. So to me, as an engineer, those things are a bit of a warning sign. And it's better to be able to have a system that inherently does not accommodate those types of deep introspective analysis, and just do our best from an engineering perspective to make sure that the network runs quickly and efficiently and with the least overhead possible. And we just kind of have to hope that people aren't doing bad things with it, but it isn't our place to step in and enforce that people do good things with it. To my knowledge, I don't know of any like darknet marketplaces or anything like that use TurtleCoin, so I don't even think it's something that should really be on our radar, because I don't know, there's other currencies that specifically dedicate themselves to that type of thing. Not to say that Bitcoin wouldn't work great for that type of thing. It's just, I think we've done a good job so far of fostering a community that, is really actually in it for the tech and doing good things. So, more power to those that are, making that their job. I'm sure it's a lot of heat to take on, but I'm kind of proud of where we are right now. And I like where our, position on fungibility is, in that if you pay me for, like, let's say you sell me a basketball or something like that, and I pay you in dirty inputs, that shouldn't be your problem. You were selling a basketball. I don't know, maybe it's beating the same point over and over, but that's kind of how I feel about it.
No, I think you're right to beat that point. To that end, I actually forgot about that news article regarding that compliancy. So while my mind was on the eco impact of mining and the energy consumption, I totally forgot about that article. So I actually went and dug it up quick while I was listening to you, and
nice.
And it kind of plays exactly into what you were saying, right? So just kind of taking a look at what that compliance meant, and I don't want to focus too much on this, but it's important to understand here what occurred. So what they mined, or that BTC block that group mined, was what they called a sanctions compliant block.
What are these sanctions?
So that's immediately where my mind went, is what sanctions. So the quick takeaway from this, in essence, was that they actually avoided mining transactions. So they filtered out transactions from what they considered to be riskier Bitcoin wallets that may be linked to organizations or groups or nations or whatever it is, right, that are on sanctions list. So already, they're touting this OFAC compliant mining pool that is filtering and manipulating the transactions that are taking place to try to avoid getting caught, helping sanctioned entities.
Okay, so first of all, here's a problem with that. So just to give a little background on myself, I don't necessarily agree with things that banks do. I'm a product of the banking crisis, and I choose not to give them any type of business if I can. So in the banking world, if you have no credit usage, low credit usage, you could have a great credit rating. You could be the best at paying your debts and things like that. But if you have no reputation, that's worse than having a bad reputation. So what happens to the guy who just created a brand new Bitcoin wallet, maybe got on Coinbase and got his first Bitcoins, and he's trying to send a transaction? Does that lack of a reputation in that wallet, that brand new wallet, is it treated the same way here? I'm kind of curious what their criteria is and how much much presence they have on the BTC network right now, like hash rate wise, because at a certain point you have to start making a calculation at what's the odds that your transaction, like you now have like a social fee that you're paying. You know what I mean? This is like reputation
Makes
score
sense.
type stuff. Like, when is Experian going to be putting their hand in front of my face saying, nah, hang on, playa? You know, like what happened to our permissionless payment system? Where did it all go so wrong?
Well, I think that's the struggle. You know, you said it best before, you know, when they're trying to gain adoption, or I guess you could say buy-in, but not in the sense of buying coins, but just general adoption, right? And some of the regulations that are slowly working their way out in a number of different countries, they feel like they have to comply. And I'm not saying that I'm advocating not complying, because obviously being out of jail is better than in jail in many ways. But there's ways that you can kind of approach that, right? You can submit and you can turn what you've built, this new thing, this avenue to fight against some of that injustice and the original efforts that caused the creation of the network. You can fight them from the standpoint that you can try to shape regulation and encourage the governments and whatnot to take a more innovative stance, I guess you could say. Or you can start to play in the existing sandbox and basically, hate to say it this way, sell out and shift back over to the status quo, which really at the end of the day doesn't accomplish, I think, what the original goal was.
You know, I don't I don't think it's any specific one of those. I think it's a combination of all of them, because there's a legacy system of rules and laws and things like that, and we were born here, so we have to abide by those rules. And so I get that. I'm fine with that. So to a certain degree, you have to, you know, speak their language and you know, present the information to them in a way that they can understand it. So at the end of the day, you have to realize that government is comprised of people, and those people more often than not are from the community that they govern. So these people are going to have interests just like you and I. And so it's our job to explain to them about these topics in simple ways that they can understand, and making good explanations and you know, analogies and things like that is kind of like a muscle that you have to flex. So you have to work on that as a nerd. And so explaining these things to them is the most important thing you can do. Like, just like whenever we had the hero miners problem, there was no way that we could just enforce our will. That would make more people go the opposite way. The only way that we could get out of it is by educating and explaining to people why we feel this way. And I don't think that the government does these things to us to be punitive, you know, like I don't think that it's the government forcing these people to create these mining pools. I think it's just somebody saw a demand or some type of potential for, you know, virality. So they went ahead and did it. You know, that's the world we live in these days. So I don't think they were prompted by the government to do that, but I don't think the government's necessarily going to turn down that type thing. And I think that the reason why the government may be a little bit cagey or hostile towards digital currency, it's not because they know the threat or have identified a threat. I think it's because there's a lot of collective unknown and unknown potential about this type of thing. And if they don't get ahead of it, there could be some type of issue or some type of chance to usurp the financial prowess or financial capability of the existing financial system that a lot of people are very invested in because they've been creating it for hundreds of years. So I think that a lot of this is not because the government is necessarily malicious. And whenever I say the government, this is a very Amerocentric view. So if you're from France right now, I mean, go grab a baguette for the moment. But like, I don't necessarily think that they're trying to be punitive or be, you know, exclude us from the financial systems. I think it's more that they have a lack of information about it. And what they have seen so far is things that are not great, like reckless treatment of money, people obscuring their tax liabilities, gambling, unsanctioned gambling, untaxed transactions. There's a lot of things that are readily apparent to somebody who has the most basic understanding of this type of thing, that to any government official would seem like, oh, well, yeah, obviously this is a risk. We need to, you know, put a finger on that. And I think what is our obligation as people who are passionate about about blockchain and, you know, all the possibilities that this could have is it's our duty and our obligation to explain to them the things that could possibly be of benefit to them. Every government is going to understand the value in cross-border transfer. Every government understands that whenever they move their hard currency or hard assets across borders, that there's these inherent risks, you know, piracy, things like that. So value transfer across borders electronically and cryptographically safe is very important. And so I'm sure by now they understand those types of advantages of digital currency, but there's also other advantages, you know, and not everything has to be like Bitcoin where you have to run huge warehouses with miners and all this type of stuff. You don't even have to have a currency on these types of networks, but I think it's on us to explain to them the utility that this could be before the worst of us, like all the people out there pulling scams and, you know, crypto locking people's fucking networks and all this shit. Like, I think that we need to outpace the negative news about this type of stuff and just kind of flood them with the positive things and help them with projects where this could benefit them. And don't get me wrong, you know, blockchain is seldom the appropriate solution for things. You know, it's just basically a very slow database. But whenever it comes to governments, we have concepts like democracy and things like that. So maybe there's some potential there with these permissionless type networks. But I think it's as long as we are doing our job to explain to them the concepts, they can't be acting out of the fear of the unknown because they'll be more familiar with the topic at hand and they'll be able to make more sound judgment. So I wish I could remember. There was a senator that I saw. I want to say it's Ron Wyden, but I could be wrong. There was a senator that I saw recently in a Senate hearing that was making some compelling arguments that made it sound like they probably understood a little bit of what I'm trying to explain here. And I can only hope that we get more people with this type of expertise into office so that we don't have these reactionary measures where there's, you know, in some cases, draconian laws being enacted that treat cryptocurrency worse than just regular currency. And I dare say that regular cash USD has enabled more crime than cryptocurrency ever has. And yeah.
Very well put. You know, that's for sure. It's kind of the hard part, you know, and that's part of the reason why I think in my mind that we started doing these podcasts is to educate. And that's always been a goal of some of the work that we've done is to educate on blockchain and, you know, not necessarily overpromise and underdeliver, right? You know, that's obviously not the goal, but we want to make sure that people are knowledgeable, because the more people that are knowledgeable, to your point, the more that the technology can be used in ways that make sense, you know, without necessarily being stifled by legislation that just hurts the innovation aspect, right?
Yeah. You know, and one thing that I thought of, and sorry to cut you off, but both you and I are old enough to remember whenever the internet was invented and whenever that came about and how people were very skeptical about it at first. And a lot of people in positions of authority sometimes were, you know, shooting from the hip regulation wise as far as what could possibly happen on the internet. And I think that we have definitely had plenty of examples of legislation and the fear of what may be kind of running away with itself before the common knowledge of the technology could catch up, you know. And the same thing with like music and that type of stuff, like Satanic Panic, that type thing. That's what it reminds me of, is like that same feeling where the whole, like the majority don't understand something, and so now we must fear it and now we must exclude it. There's been countless examples of that, but whenever the internet was invented was one. I think whenever like people were talking about Quake and video games like Doom and stuff like that, encouraging school that things like that. That's what it reminds me of.
You know, that's probably fair. You know, there's plenty of examples, like you said, you know, from VHS tapes and being able to record things and time shift to just the aspect of any type of digital recording medium, right?
MP3s.
There's always that aspect. Sorry, what was that?
MP3s,
digital music. I mean, that's an excellent example there without going too far. I mean, how long did all the platforms kind of fight fight, the digital revolution into taking it for digital distribution until eventually they embraced it, right? Now we've got the Google Play Store where you can rent music. You've got Spotify, you've got Apple Music, you've got all that stuff going on now, and they've embraced it now, and I think they're better for it. I don't know when the last time was that I bought a CD or anything like that, but it just takes a while. But it took a lot of education and a lot of working with the technology providers to understand what the implementation, got tongue tied, to understand what all of that means and how they could use it, while still, serving the populace. And I think that, to your point, we're at a precipice, a tipping point, so to speak, on how does this apply to cryptocurrency? And it's all part of that same conversation, that it does drive discussions of fungibility and, those types of topics. Like, how do we do this in a way that makes sense without necessarily destroying what was created already, or at least the fundamental applications of what was created already? And again, I'm happy to think that, we've made that dedication to fungibility in TurtleCoin. So a lot of that stuff kind of goes away, but there's other aspects that we have to think about as well, right? So whether it's, building up the network and keeping it fast and stable and, doing things that make sense to us, right? We're largely developing it based upon the technology and we're engineering it in a way that we believe that we're creating a long-lived stable network as much as possible. But I'm sure that sometime in the future, there's going to be other discussions that we have to consider. We just don't know what those are today.
That's a good way of putting it. So what are some positives from non-fungibility?
Some positives, man. Well, it's really simple to sync your wallet.
Well, we just spent the last, hour or so talking about the negatives of fungibility or of non-fungibility and why we've chosen to be fungible and maintain fungibility. What would be, just to give the opposite side of the argument, what would you say are the positives of being non-fungible? What are some things that would be easier? Maybe that's a better way to ask you.
That's probably a tough question to really unravel, because I'm sure that people have some different viewpoints here. But, from my thought process is that it's a lot easier to do financial reporting, and I'm not saying that that's a good or a bad thing, right? It's a lot easier to make sure that people are staying compliant with taxing purposes, whether your jurisdiction does that or not, or how they how they classify the assets, or et cetera, right? It does make that a little bit easier to be enforceable, because I'm of the mindset that if you owe the tax, you pay the tax, and if them's the rules, so to speak. Pay unto Caesar.
if you pay your tax, they can't come and take your money. So
exactly. So
that's
some of that stuff is just easier when you don't have fungibility, right? Because it's tracked for you, so to speak, right?
Right. Well,
the other side of it is. Go ahead. No, you go.
So I was going to say, given that TurtleCoin already makes it pretty easy to look into those types of things by supplying you with the keys that allow you to provide permission for some type of audit, what really separates us, other than, in our case, you have to give permission to be subject to that type of audit?
That pretty much is the difference, right? In all honesty, you have to give permission to be audited versus, on the non-fungible side, they don't require your permission. They can just do it for you.
The general public can.
What's that?
The general public can. It's not just the government. It's anybody. You could be buying a hot dog from some guy on the street, and he can look up your entire payment history, and he can find out if you've been going to the other hot dog guy, beat you up, take your relish.
Take your relish. Oh man, that's funny. That got a little giggle out of me off mic there, but
can you tell I'm hungry?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely coming up on lunchtime here too, but let's not dive too far into that. Otherwise, I think we'll both disappear. But yeah, to your point, the flip side of that is that, from a non-fungible standpoint, where everything can be traced and everything's basically a giant database, with showing balances for everybody and being able to see all that, you can do some of the additional things that we see at work on some of the other networks. Make it really easy to figure out how much you got without necessarily having to do a full scan of your wallet, right? You can go plug it into a block explorer and see what you have there and know that that's there. It's a lot easier to do those non-fungible tokens. Notice that they're called non-fungible for a reason, because we all can see who owns what, right? That's probably one of the easier things. And while I may not fully understand what the draw of those NFTs are. I get it. People seem to like the idea, and they're going after it.
I just like the idea of a Magic the Gathering card that doesn't have a bent fucking edge.
Now you're
Apparently,
making me feel old.
Yeah. I know you have a shoebox of them somewhere. Everybody does.
Yeah. At some point, I'll have to dig out my my second edition cards. I don't know where they're at though. They're in a box buried somewhere, probably in an attic.
I taught my wife how to play.
Oh, how'd that go?
She beat me. So anyway, let me throw a curveball at you. So the other day we were talking about the differences between a UTXO based network and a balance based network, and to kind of fill in the people that are listening right now and their eyes are rolling in the back of their head and they're asking what the hell is UTXO. So the way that a network like Bitcoin works and TurtleCoin is that you have unspent transaction outputs. And so if you think of a transaction as a collection of inputs, outputs, think of them like coins. Like you have some nickels here, you have some quarters here, you have some dollars here, and a handful of those equals a transaction, and you send that by handing it to somebody. So whenever you have a transaction on Bitcoin, there's a collection of those little amounts and things that creates the full amount of your transaction. Well, whenever you send a transaction on Ethereum, it's a balance-based blockchain. So you just have a value transfer from one end to the other. Think of it as everything is one input. And so you would have, let's say you're sending 10.318, and that's exactly how much comes out of your account and how much goes into the other account. So the other day we were talking about this, and I brought it up to I Burn My CD. What if we, just as a thought experiment, what if we went to a balance-based economy? How would that affect the Turtle V2 network? And the conversation that came from that was pretty interesting, if I recall correctly. What were some of your observations on that?
Well, there'd certainly be some challenges in that aspect because of the idea that I think we'd still want to try to maintain fungibility even in a balance-based network. So at that point, we have to make sure that, or we would have to make sure, let's be honest here, because I don't know that I have any plans to chase this right this minute, that the balances were hidden, so to speak. They would be balance-based. They would be tracked. I mean, think like Rock said, the idea that at the end of the day, a balance-based network is like having an Excel spreadsheet where you're just keeping track of what everybody has. And when Rock sends me money, it's deducted from his and it's put in mine, just like a general ledger in regular accounting. But let's say that we did want to do this and we wanted it to be fungible and that we still wanted to keep the privacy aspects. Then it becomes a little bit more difficult because all of those transaction values, from my balance to the amount of the transaction to ultimately Rock's updated balance, we'd have to hide that information or make it so way, everybody can't see it. Just me, myself. I can see it and can unlock and see what my balance is. Kind of like a lockbox at a bank, right? Hopefully they aren't going through it and seeing what's in there, but I have the keys to unlock that balance and see what I have and ultimately be able to spend it. And there's probably ways that we could pull that off and that you could do that, whether it's doing some unique math, or I shouldn't say necessarily unique, but doing some fun math with some Peterson commitments and, unlocking and time locking things and whatnot. I suppose it's possible. And the biggest benefit of that, in all honesty, would be that we don't have to scan wallets at all anymore, right? Because the balance is just stored, so to speak, in the network state machine. I mean, there's no better way to put it.
It would be a one block blockchain, essentially.
Exactly. I mean, at that point, it's just instructions saying move this from here to here, just like a general ledger, like I said in accounting speak. And whatever the state is what it is. There's no shifting, there's no blocks, there's no advancement. You're just processing transactions at that point.
That type of, whenever the conversation gets to that point, it gets really exciting for me because it almost makes me think of a previous goal of ours called Mobius.
Well, I'm going to let you, throw that out there because I got to be honest. Sometimes, man, all right, that one's not always connecting with me on what exactly the plan was there.
Okay, so this was early in the early days of the blockchain, and we were already kind of feeling the burden of the sync, and we were like, what the fuck, man, this is a lot to sync. And so the the idea was that you would have a subset of clients that would only pay attention to like the last, I don't know, like let's say 30,000 blocks or something like that. And the idea was to have your coins like auto churn within your wallet. I'm not sure if we got far enough to even dream up of how this would happen, but to have your coins be automatically churned every, X amount of blocks, so that you always only have to scan from the tip minus 3,000 or however many blocks back you want to be scanning. So obviously you can see the problems with that plan. And so quickly it became like a big reason why I was like, God, get the roadmap out of here, throw some gas on it. We got to get it out of here, And I think that's the one goal to this day that we just never achieved, which was the whole point was to be able to discard large sections of the blockchain and just kind of only scan X amount of blocks every time that you wanted to board the network again. But the amount of data it would have taken, like it's pretty obvious, it would have not been feasible. It would have made verifying the entire blockchain just an absolute nightmare. And I don't think it would have done anything positive. And so the original goal being only sync so much data and have your balance data available immediately, to which having like a rolling state of the balance would kind of fulfill that goal. But yeah, so that's what it makes me think of whenever I think of basically an immediate sync as soon as you turn on the network. Like to me that seems like one of the things that always let me down about blockchain, even since like day one of me being involved in any of that, is like the amount of time that it takes to turn on your machine, turn on your node, and get on the network to a usable point. That sync has always been like a sore in the eye of blockchain to me. Like I think that's one thing that hurts wider adoption is the time that it takes to board the network. And this is before like SPV and all that type of stuff came out. So like light clients and all that, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a full node and a full client. And stuff like that, in my opinion, has always kind of held back blockchain from wider adoption because people are like, they're already kind of burned out because you just made them generate like 5 forms of passwords and they have to write down passphrases and things, and some stuff is in red and it's telling people that if you give them that little passphrase that all their money is going to be stolen, and they're like, wait, but that's only a few words, somebody can just guess those. And there's already all the stuff that they have to think about, and then you're like, all right, now sit tight for the next 10 days. You're going to be syncing here, and I know you don't have any money in your wallet yet, but you're going to want to sync all this stuff that happened before you got here. It's like arriving at a party and then being handed a transcript of every conversation that happened at the party, and you have to read every single one to verify that shit happened. And that's just ridiculous. So I think that the sooner we can get away from that type of thing, the quicker we can achieve more adoption. And if we can do that without sacrificing privacy, fungibility, and our core values, man, that would be the secret sauce.
The secret sauce, indeed. I mean, you touched on pretty much everything that's kind of baked into V2, right? The smaller transactions, trimming the data down so we're not waiting for tons of data to come in, getting just to the meat and potatoes and sync, which kind of brings it to another topic, even from the standpoint of the wallets, right? Being able to synchronize a wallet, man, it is a chore, especially if you have an older wallet, right? And have to dig through all that stuff. You don't know when it was created. Who the hell writes down the date, on their seed phrases or their keys, right? I know I didn't, but
Me neither.
I was involved, I'll say pretty early, so me syncing from zero is inevitable if I want to go grab that stuff. But at the same time, I have certainly churned all of my funds on chain, so that way I'm not syncing the entire thing, but that's a different topic discussion. So kind of brings us into one of the dev updates that I kind of wanted to share with everybody on something that we kind of talked through over the last week or so that I went ahead and implemented in some code, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah.
So as we all know, as I just kind of mentioned there, when you create a wallet seed or you create a new wallet, it's not very often that you write down what the block height was when you created it, and you certainly probably don't write down the date that you credited it either, which is kind of important in all honesty, because it doesn't matter what blockchain it is. If you have the ability to identify when you created that wallet, I mean, chances of there being funds in a wallet before you created it, probably astronomical, right? You can make the references to the number of atoms in the universe or whatever that is, right? But to put it in perspective, there's no funds on the wallet until you create it. You have to have some transactions, and to have some transactions, you got to create the wallet. It's real simple, chicken and egg. So what I did here recently in this past week when I had some free time is that I actually kind of turned things around a little bit. We were having some discussions about the mnemonic phrases and the mnemonic words that Rock so lovingly put can be a barrier in some ways, but I wanted to try to help that process of restoring a wallet. You've got a paper wallet. It's got some words on there, some phrases. You don't know when you created it. I wanted to help that process along. So what I did was I actually changed the way in V2 that the mnemonic words are generated. I shouldn't really say it the way that they're generated, but I've included some additional data in those words. So whereas today, working with V1, we've got 25 word mnemonic phrases that are used to restore wallets. I added a couple extra words on there. And you may be asking yourself, what are the extra words for, Bern?
What are the words for?
Oh, you can do better than that. I mean, I'm going to need at least, a Billy Mays like television special response out of that one. Let's try that again. You may be asking yourself, what are the words for, Bern?
What are the words for, Bern?
Thank God. There we go. Let me tell you all about what the words are for, right? So I'm laughing. The extra words are baked into the wallet mnemonics in V2 to track the timestamp of when you created it. So in essence, the date and time that you created the seed. So when you created the wallet, the huge benefit here is that when you go to restore the wallet, we can now decode and know when you created the wallet. So wait, you won't have to sync blocks before that. And you don't have to write it down. You don't have to keep track of a different date or a different block height or anything like that. It just is, and it's part of it, and it's checked. So even if you mess up the words, you're going to mess up that checksum, and it's never going to decode correctly. So we're making it easier, to lock up a paper wallet and laminate it on a sheet, bury it in a chock full of nuts can in the backyard, come back to it a couple of years later, and not have to worry about, hey, where did I create this thing at? And the flip side of that also is even brand new wallets. If you went and created a brand new wallet, by default in a lot of the clients, they do start from the current block height, which is awesome. Unfortunately, if you create one and you're not paying attention, you may start scanning from zero, which is a pain in the ass today, just to put it simply, right? By doing it like
against
this,
humanity.
What's that?
It's a crime against humanity.
It is. It's definitely a war crime at the very least. So, at least with this method and storing those in those mnemonic phrases, the creation timestamp, it's almost dummy proof. You have to consciously say, no, I don't want to restore from the height that I created the wallet. I want to restore from earlier. Most people are never going to check that box. And to be honest with you, I don't even know that we should give them the option, but that's a different discussion entirely, right?
Yep. I think if you really wanted to gamble and if you have like an extra week of your life to do all that scanning, you could scan from zero and see if maybe somebody sent a transaction to the wrong place and by some random chance typed in your address, even though the chances of that, as you said, are far more numerous than the amount of atoms in the universe, but it could be. You never know.
Yeah.
How can you win if you don't play?
If you're the prey-in type, by all means, go for it, but I don't know that I've got the patience for that myself.
Well, we have a saying here at the dice table, how can you win if you don't play?
Which is exactly why I continue to generate random Bitcoin key pairs. Just saying. Except, them being UTXO based and all the explorers out there and totally transparent, it's really easy to figure out whether or not funds are there, right?
Yeah, it's a lot less sync time.
Yeah, for sure. But all kidding aside, it's one of those things that as we kind of thought through the processes that we thought, hey, look, we see a lot of this coming in where people are like, man, I got a wallet to restore. I don't know when I created it. Can you help me try to figure out when? And I built some tools into the Explorer a while ago that allows you to input a date when you think you may have created it, or at the very least, maybe the beginning of the month. And it goes and tells you what block height was around that date, right? To try to help you restore from an unknown height. But that only goes so far, and people may say, oh man, my funds still aren't there. Well, sorry, you got to resync older. Well, how far back? Well, if you want to be 100% sure, go to zero, right? This helps to remove that problem, that issue, that friction to adoption, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think and this might only be like tangentially related, but just thinking about my own project, Rock Wallet, I'm thinking I should probably provide for a way for somebody to specify whether they're new at this or whether they're an advanced user, and only expose the functionality that the user might be needing. So if they're a beginner, then I'm not going to present things to them like scan from zero or anything like that. I'm just going to infer that from the seed phrase.
I'm over here laughing because as you were saying that, I'm like, okay, so there's two settings. There's normal user and when moon mode.
Yeah, basically. There was I can't remember what wallet it was that I used on what network recently, but it had a thing in the beginning that it had two boxes, and it said, I'm new at this and I know what I'm doing, or something, two distinct boxes. It may have been Cardano's wallet called Daedalus, I think. I'm not sure. But either way, the wallet lets you specify whether you're going to need some coaching and hand-holding or whether you just needed to be presented with all the options. And I kind of appreciated that.
For sure. And that level of detail that's spent there, I mean, to your point, that does help because there's quite a few people that, they are new to this. We know that they are not well-versed in the technology, and we're here to kind of help educate them. And the best way to do that is to know your audience, right? And identifying that early in the experience can definitely improve the overall experience for everyone involved. I don't know how many people have come into the chat and into Reddit over the years that have said, man, this is completely unusable because I have to sync this war crime of a blockchain to get to my funds. And we heard you. It made sense. We agree. Let's try to address this. And it's exciting to think about that. While it's something relatively small, it can make a huge impact to the actual experience of interacting with a net.
Yeah, I think it's one of the more significant barriers to entry currently that we face. And V2 is going to alleviate a lot of that. But who's going to say that 10 years down the road after V2 that if we haven't figured out something extra, even with pruning and stuff like that, and even with the amount of bandwidth we'll probably have 10 years from now, it may still be an uncomfortable sync, or for some people.
For sure. I mean, it's going to be a real pain in the ass moving around those 171 byte transactions.
I note your snark.
Snark, sarcasm, it's all the same these days, right?
Yeah. So let's see. Given that we kind of opened up pruning there, that brings us to topic 5, transaction size reductions via pruning.
Man, I thought you wanted to save that for its own episode, but I'll tell you what, we'll make this real simple. I'll keep it on the relatively light
Give them
side.
A taste.
Yeah, we'll give them a taste of some of the things that I've thought through the last couple of weeks as I've been revisiting some of the crypto functions and working on the TripTech implementation. Right? I decided that, hey, look, I think we can make transactions smaller. Was kind of the approach that I came from with. And you may be saying, what do you mean make them smaller? Matter of fact, I think when I told you, you were like, what? Wait, what? What do you mean smaller? I thought they were already tiny as it was, right?
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about the aspect of pruning before and what that means. And I know that I touched on it in a couple of the articles and a little bit in the podcast, but it all starts from the fact that in V2, the transactions that enter the memory pool contain all the data that's necessary to validate those transactions, verify that they're following the rules of consensus, the POW is completed, all the signatures are valid, the bulletproofs are valid, all that kind of stuff, right? All that data is there in the mempool. And as we mentioned before, when it's actually committed on chain, a lot of that stuff's trimmed off because the producers and the validators presumably did their job correct, right? So why do we need to maintain that and keep that going forward? Well, the answer was we don't, right? So Fast forward a little bit, and I got to thinking about it, and this is one of those things where as you're going through the first couple of iterations, you end up, thinking about how things work today, and inevitably, sometimes you carry across some of the same concepts and structures, if that makes any sense, as you're kind of going through a rewrite and re-engineering.
Yeah.
Like, nobody goes, I'm going to build a new building, and, now I have to think about how concrete is poured, right? That's the step they skip. They know where to pour the concrete. They know that concrete's required, but they don't necessarily think about the mix all the time, right?
Right.
So that was kind of the thought process there. And as I was revisiting things for TripTech, I kind of took a look at the transaction structure and I said, wait a minute, if I'm trimming the signatures off, and our ring sizes are 256 ring participants or more, the offsets, how we we figure out who's involved in that ring to validate that signature, that stuff can go with it, because that only has a bearing when you're verifying the ring signature itself. Once it's committed to chain, I don't need those offsets anymore. So instantly, kind of looking back at it on a very rough model, we can shave off 64 bits times, let's say 256 participants.
For the people that aren't seeing the implications here, that means quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, without talking about, the possibility of binning inputs and things like that and grouping things together, I mean, real quick math says that I can trim an additional 2 kilobytes off of a normal transaction at the high end, right? Without any fancy way, just straight encoding of, uint 64s or 64-bit numbers that are tracking those offsets. So that's the high side, the worst that it could be at best. If you've got a relatively low transaction, at its smallest, it's still going to pull off at least 256 bytes from the transaction. So, when I went down and did this, the minimal size of a transaction, so very important that I say minimal size, meaning one input, one output, no extra data, just the bare minimum to transaction the network, hovers in at 171 bytes, which is down considerably, knowing that the possibility before was, 400 bytes and upwards. So just rethinking about where we store that information at, how we structure those transactions, and knowing what else we can prune, I've cut the size of the transactions on chain basically by, let's call it 60% again.
So how many transactions at 171 bytes can go into our current transaction size?
Oh, Jesus. The average transaction size, you mean on the V1 network?
Yeah.
Or I haven't ran those V1 stats for a while, but just taking a quick look at our average transactions that I see on the pool, when I glance, is that, they've got a handful of outputs, a handful of inputs. Those come in usually in the 4 to 8 kilobyte range, if that makes sense. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
So, just do the real quick math there, right? Doing the real quick math there, and I apologize for pausing to grab the calculator.
I got 23.95.
Yeah, so 24 transactions in the same amount of space, and that's a minimal transaction in the same amount of space as what is probably a pretty standard transaction today, right?
Yep.
So that's a huge increase in our ability to store stuff, but more importantly, it greatly reduces the storage requirements. So when I joked before about, syncing across 171 byte transactions, again, it is the minimal side, but just think about it from that standpoint. Even if I add another input, I have to spend additional funds. I'm only adding 32 bytes, for the additional key image there. So, we're still, under 200 bytes at that point.
That would give us a blockchain size.
Say that again?
Well, I did some math, and that would give us a blockchain size right now of like 6.25 gigabytes.
Oh, that's hot.
Dude.
Man, We're almost down into zip disk territory.
Well, the last zip disk I had was 100 megabytes.
Oh, we'll just turn on compression. We'll be good. Yeah, but it's exciting to think about that. Yeah, if that was our current chain today and that was our average size across the run, and to what I was saying earlier, I could probably run some quick math on, the number of inputs, the number of outputs in usual transactions. I would probably throw out Canty pixels because that seems to slew our averages, but it's massive. I mean, that's a massive reduction in chain storage size. And then ultimately, when you're syncing a wallet, even though I talked about improving the sync process by saving the data creation there, we're downloading considerably less data as well, right? To sync a wallet, whether it's a local node or a remote one, the entire experience is going to be improved every time we squeeze a little bit more out.
Yeah. I kind of wonder sometimes, like, if there's a way, maybe in the future, maybe V3 or something like that, what if there's a way to kind of segment the amount that you're syncing? Like, let's say that you subscribe to several different channels. So one could be purely transactional. Another one could be also pulling in extra, and then only if you want to construct all the stuff that's in extra would you have to sync that. And maybe people could handle bundle it through like some type of like subscription interface. Does that make sense?
It does. So, we're kind of talking about, at least in my mind, some of the concepts that we talked about a couple of years ago, in all honesty. And I think I even went around with this with Canty in some of the discussions as we talked about the aspect of a fast to sync client side web wallet, right? And I know that I'm kind of going off kilter here, but there's some cool ways that we can create some wallets by being a little more creative with the way that we synchronize data with wallets. And the wallets would be really light. Now, again, I'm talking about a wallet, not a node, because a node at the end of the day is something different entirely. But, not everybody needs to run a node. And as much as it pains me to say this, considering that I got slapped around last month with some overage charges for running public nodes, honestly, other than the aspect that it does reduce privacy to a certain extent, they are convenient. It makes it really easy for people to adopt the technology and hopefully eventually, run their own nodes. They do serve a purpose, but reducing the bandwidth is important that they're used, because who wants to buy the service if it's going to cost them out through the nose every month, right?
Right.
So this kind of goes hand in hand. We can reduce the transaction size, but if there was a way to your point, better understand what a wallet would find interesting, for lack of better words, that it needs to scan because the likelihood's higher that those transactions contains funds for them. Again, that could be massive. And we kind of talked through that a little bit, like I said, a couple of years ago, about how that would look. And ultimately, I know a little bit of work was done here and there, but I'm looking forward to at least building on a back end to support that for people. And who knows, to your point, it may be a subscription-based model. I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be much, but it would launch, it would propel the adoption of the network, because it'll be that whole entry barrier that we talked about before, in my mind, disappears at that point, because while there would be a slight syncing process, it would be very minimal, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I like it.
I think I envision it kind of like a Windows installer, where you're installing an application and there's various checkboxes like, do you want to install the documentation? Okay, great. Do you want to also install the taskbar icon thing or whatever? And I think it would be kind of cool if, you just provide some sane defaults that gets them to their wallet as fast as possible, and then allow them to add in the extra stuff if they want to, Exactly.
I mean, the sky's the limit, in that regard. We can practically build anything you want to. It's just making sure that we're focusing our efforts where it needs to be today, right? There's a lot of things in my mind that I would love to do and love to put together. But in all honesty, I don't want to build it twice. So I'm kind of holding off until we get the V2 off the ground, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, we can talk some more about sharding, or not sharding, but pruning and other cool topics like that in another episode. It's still exciting, to think that as much as we've talked through, we've worked out, that there's still ways that we're finding to squeeze things out. And I'd much rather figure this stuff out now than have to come back to it.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to think about it before it's implemented, because once the network is set in motion, you kind of have to live with it for a little bit.
Which is interesting, because what did I see the other day? And I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but it was an article about our friendly friends at Doge, right? And some of the tweets that somebody in particular was saying that they were working with the developers of Doge to improve things and make it go faster and yada yada yada. All the other suit.
I just want to know who took this boomer's money. Which one of you was it?
Anyways, I saw a news article that was talking about it a little bit, and some of the Doge developers, for whoever they were, I think there were like 4 or 5 people, right? Which was surprising to me, because we've talked about the commit history there before. They said, I don't see why he keeps pushing us, because it'll take like 18 months to adopt anything that we could possibly roll out there, and it hurt to think that it takes 18 months to make a simple change to maybe maybe speed up block times or whatever it is, because that's something that I think we talked about maybe with TTC on here. Is that still being a relatively smaller network, right? We have the advantage of being able to be flexible and garnering community support and making some sweeping changes, especially in V2. That, man, if we were bigger, I don't know that I'd have the same level of excitement for some of the stuff that could be coming down through the pipeline, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I did the math on that tweet. I can't remember what exactly the figures were, but it came out something like a 100, like a 10,000x reduction in profit for miners, or like it was just something ridiculous. I was like, wait, hang on a second. What was it? 10 times smaller fees, 10 times larger blocks, or something like that, and 100 times faster blocks. So I did the math on that, and I was like, wait, it was something that came up to like 10,000 or 100,000 times more burden for the same amount of money. And then I was like, wait, whoa. So these people have to track, like 100 times more data because you just made the blocks 10 times bigger. You made them 100 times more numerous. And so like just the math just didn't work out. So if you make fees cheaper, then miners don't make as much money. If you make blocks larger, then people have to carry more data in perpetuity. Okay. If you make blocks happen sooner and there's not the volume there to accommodate it, then you're going to be printing empty blocks just for the purposes of giving money to your overburdened miners. Like, I just don't understand. And all of these things increase the amount of dev overhead that's required on the network. Like, just trust us. Coming from a network that puts out blocks really, really fast, just trust me on this. It stresses everything. So, like, I really hope it just seems like some shit that, like, oh yeah, that's just common sense. I'm Elon Musk. I can make it happen. And like, I just don't think he really thought this one through. And I don't know, it's kind of embarrassing.
It's embarrassing even from the standpoint as a fellow suit. The best way to phrase that is that's what we call top-down development, where you snap your fingers and you hope that it happens and that everything works.
It's called tone deaf where I'm from.
Well, that too, right? That was my immediate thought. Like, okay, that is a suit talking right there.
Yeah, like, first of all, what developers did he come across? Like, literally who?
Yeah, that's a damn good question. As a matter of fact, I think one of the articles that I saw the other day, not to dive too much in the news, said that Sporkland passed away in April from a bout with cancer. That was actually.
I'm going to reserve commentary on that.
Fair enough, but you can even edit that part out.
Cancer sucks and everything, but
it does. I think I just killed that conversation. Yeah, just delete all that shit.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's taxing, to try to make things go faster. And Rock's absolutely right. The faster that you go, the faster that the wheels spin off, and the more that people yell. Ultimately, at the end of the day, so
it just seems like, I don't know, they're increasing the burden on their network by so much, and for what? Like, just admit that you overspoke on Twitter, and as a result, you have to backtrack some. Like, to me, it's indicative of somebody not being able to admit when they're wrong and they want to double down instead. And it's like, man, there's a lot of people that feel like this person is a genius. So there's going to be a lot of people that are just like, oh yeah, we could just do that. And they're going to be making financial decisions based off of that. And given that he only said this because he burned people financially in his careless manipulation of the price, like, he's just making it worse by doubling down, when he really should just stay in his lane. And like, not to say that the guy, obviously he's done some things right, because you don't get into that position without doing some things right. But you also, have to realize your responsibility in things, and, going out and giving financial advice, like saying that things will be a certain price by X date, even if they are, it's irresponsible at best, and
exactly.
it's not good.
No, I agree with you 100%. And that's part of the reason, at least in my mind, why I personally stray away from, a lot of the price discussion, because I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not, Series 7, certified and stuff like that. And I would never claim to be. But what I am is an engineer at heart, a software developer, a solutions provider, right? And I'm good at doing that, and I can talk about those things, and I give quite a bit of an insight to those types of topics and feel like I'm a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
I'm never going to be, at least I hope I never am going to be the type that focuses on the almighty mighty value, right? And that's why that price discussion drives me crazy at times, is because that just introduces a whole world of hurt to a whole bunch of different people and has the opportunity for manipulation, and ultimately goes against the ethos of build it and build it well. It's two totally different.
I think whenever people ask us why don't we do things that are motivated by price, and why do we kind of operate without regard to price, I think that's the perfect example right there, is what's going on with Elon and Doge on Twitter there. Like, that's what happens whenever decisions are made involving ancillary factors that have very little to do with it. Whenever you start making decisions based on price, that's when you fucked up.
Agreed.
And the public will always pressure you into trying to do that. They'll always try and pressure you into doing that, and it's just up to you to be virtuous and to not do that.
100%. And speaking of value and crazy ideas, so I had this idea that popped in the other day. Let's see how this right. I am going to go through these podcasts, and every single one of these podcasts, I am going to read off a mnemonic word and the position of that mnemonic word in that restoration phrase.
Oh, shit.
And our listeners are going to listen for that specific word that I'm going to randomly place in each one of these podcasts. And once I've revealed all 25 words, the first person that's able to sync that wallet is going to get a surprise.
Yeah.
You like where this is going? I like where this is going. Exactly. And in my mind, I am committed to dropping at least 1 million turtle in there. If not more. It depends on how long it goes on, right?
Oh, this is exciting.
It's going to be fun. So, the fun part about this is that right now, obviously, I'm dropping it in now, and I think we're probably coming up on the end of this episode, but, I will be dropping it in random parts of other episodes. So it'll be important that you listen to the whole thing, and hopefully no asshats out there just post on the web where the words are at, timestamp. But we'll kick it off with this one. Rock, pick a number.
13.
I'm sorry, you broke up just a little bit. Pick a number again.
13.
13. What is mnemonic word number 13? It is going to be edgy. That's
edgy.
EDGY. Mnemonic word 13 out of 25 total words. So, hopefully people continue to listen and get the full set of words, and I'll be able to restore that wallet sometime in the future and pluck those funds out of it.
Alrighty. This is pretty exciting. I wonder after how many words are people just going to start trying to brute force it?
That would be interesting, but it's incredibly difficult to start brute forcing that without that final word, that 25th word with the check.
True. All right. Want to place any bets on how long it's going to take?
Well, it's going to take probably at least another 24 weeks, depending on how often we record these, right?
Yeah.
Once that 25th word gets out here, then, I bet you they sync it pretty fast. I mean, I guess the key here is that I'm not going to tell people when I drop the funds in the wallet, because as far as we know, this bad boy's back from block 2,
True.
It's not. It's going to be and good luck to whoever catches those on.
I have a few contest wallets that remain unclaimed. Either that, or I guess the people that won them just never moved the funds or lost the keys or whatever. But one of these days, I'm going to start turning them back into the wild, at least before V2. And I've also got a ton of wallets that I created that have like 100 turtle in them a piece for like giveaways and things like that. I remember one point I printed a bunch in slips of paper, and I was going to put them into the like pages of books in a library, but then COVID happened and they took away my library.
That's one way to do it. I'd probably put them in the personal help section.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I believe that. I believe that kind of covers it. Was there anything else that we had on the list?
No, I think we're good for this episode, so we can probably wrap it up real quick.
All right, edgy bros. Thanks for tuning in this week, and everybody, if you haven't already, give us a thumbs up and a subscribe and all that stuff.